Hello and welcome back to another Maya tutorial. This time we're going to have a look at making a very basic table with a small amount of detail. So to begin with, make sure your project folder is set. So go to File, Set Project, select your project folder, mine's called Table, click on it just once and then Set and then Create Default Workspace. And now we're going to save this scene inside our project folder before we start. So File, Save Scene. If you look at the top here, we can see the path is going into our project folder. And I'm just going to go ahead and call this Tabletop because I'm going to make the legs in a separate scene and then import the two together. Save As. And if we take a quick look in our project folder, if you haven't seen my Getting Started tutorials, we need to make sure we have a source images folder just in case we need reference images or textures. It has to be lowercase with no capital letters, no underscores, spaces or full stops. Okay, once that's set up, we're ready to go. We're going to open our channel box, which is at the very top right corner of the screen, and it's the far right icon up here. And we're going to click on Windows and open the outliner so we can actually retitle some of our objects. I'm just going to move that down and out of the way for now. Now we're going to make a circular table or a round table. So I'm going to start with a cylinder, and you can see my menu set is on modelling and my shelf is set to polygons. Then we can go ahead and select a cylinder and make quite a large but not very tall cylinder on our grid. Retitle that by going to the outliner, make sure it's selected, double click on the default name of P Cylinder 1, and I'm going to call that Tabletop, then press enter. Now we can move it to the centre of the grid by going to the channel box and typing in zeros on Translate X, Y and Z. And I want to put some detail in here, so I want to pull a new section out or extrude a new section out on the top. But before that, if we have a look at this, we can see how many divisions we have. Now we've got the default 20, which is quite high. I want to reduce that. 20 would be okay if we wanted to put a lot of detail in, or if we wanted to keep this as a foreground object. But since it's just going to be basic and it might be in the background, we can get away with reducing the divisions quite a bit. So with the object selected, go over to your channel box, go to Inputs, Polycylinder 1, click on the words Polycylinder 1, and then have a look at your subdivisions axis. You can see that's 20. Reduce that down to 12 and press enter. And you can see that if we look down on this tabletop, it's not very round anymore. Don't worry about that because we're going to smooth this later on. The next thing to do to actually make a selection of just the top is to right click, hold the right button down, go to Face, and then we can select one of the faces, and we can select multiple by holding Shift and then selecting all of the others on the top. Now have a quick rotate around to make sure you haven't selected any unwanted faces. If you have, if you did select one on the bottom by accident, just hold Shift, re-click on it and it will actually deselect that. Okay, once you're happy with your selection, go up to Edit Mesh, and we're going to use the Extrude Tool, but before we click on that, we're going to go to the option box on the right and then reset the settings. So go to Edit, Reset Settings. That's just in case a previous person has actually changed these. Click on Extrude. Now I'll explain the Extrude tool in much more detail in a separate tutorial, but for now click on what we call the global button, which is this one here. It looks like a power button just to the right top corner of our actual tool, and you can see that's now put this in the very center of our selected area, and it means, because it's global, it means it's in line with our grid. And the Extrude tool is really a combination of move, scale and rotate, but you can use your separate tools. So we're just going to pull this up slightly, and I want to scale this in, so I'm going to use the separate scale tool. So go over to your tool palette, scale tool, and we're going to scale that in from the center, just a small amount. You might want to keep rotating around to actually see how that looks. And then we're going to use the extrude tool again. We need to click on that again so it pulls a new section out. And rather than going to edit mesh, I'm going to use the shortcut on my shelf. And if you're unsure of any of these, just hold the mouse over them and it tells you what they are. It's this one here. Click on that. Click on global again to make sure it's in line with the grid and in the center. And we're going to pull a new section out. Now we're going to click on the background just to deselect all of that. And we're going to go back to the selection tool or the select tool. Right click on the object and go back to object mode. And now if we select it again, we're going to try smoothing this to see what happens. Now if we look down from the top, and to smooth it press 3 on the keyboard. Now that actually looks quite good from the top. It's no longer jagged, it's quite smooth, it's quite round. However, if we rotate back round and look from the side, we've lost a lot of this detail that we've put in. So if we press 1 to unsmooth, and you can press 3 to smooth and 1 to unsmooth as many times as you like. You can keep switching. It's sometimes easier to model unsmoothed and then smooth it at the end, but it's really personal preference. Now we need to actually put some more divisions in to constrain some of this detail. So I'm going to go to Mesh Tools, and I'm going to use the Insert Edge Loop tool. Click on that, and now we need to zoom in quite close. And we want to use these vertical lines, or this vertical and this diagonal line here, going up to the top. And I'm going to click and hold the mouse button in on one of these vertical edges. And if I drag up and down, you can see that's actually putting a division or a loop all the way around our object. And you'll find if you actually drag all the way down to the bottom or all the way to the top and then release the mouse, it will disappear. So we need to give ourselves a small gap at the very bottom and then one at the top. So click, hold the mouse button in and drag up, give yourself a small gap and then release the mouse. If I zoom in, you'll see that in a bit more detail. There's a small gap there. Now we're going to do the same on this section. Click and drag and release the mouse just before the bottom. Same on the top. I'll zoom in a bit more here. Click and drag and release the mouse just before the top. And you might find for the very top here you need to zoom in quite close. Otherwise you may accidentally select a different section. So if I did select here, for example, I don't really want a division there. So you might want to press Z to actually undo that. So I go back to the correct edge, click, drag holding the mouse button in, release the mouse towards the bottom and then the same towards the top. Then we can zoom out. We need to go back to our object mode. So right click on your object, object mode, and I'm going to go back to my select tool just to make sure my edge loop tool is turned off. Click on my object again and let's try smoothing it now. So press 3. Deselect your object just to turn the wireframe off, and that actually looks quite good now. We can even move it up a bit if we want to see it away from the grid. And I'm actually going to scale this down. It's a bit too tall for a tabletop, so I can flatten that a bit. So that doesn't look too bad. If we do zoom in closer, you can see there are some jagged edges, but since this is just a low detailed object for a background, that's fine. If you zoom out, it will actually render nice and smooth. So the next thing to do is just save the scene again. So File, Save Scene, and then stay tuned for part 2 where we can actually model the table leg.